Hello everyone. Tonight we delve into a role so steeped in shadow and psychic dread that even the most stoic commissar might hesitate. We're going to walk through the life of an assassin's handler in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. Imagine your entire existence is to manage a living weapon, a person remade into an instrument of death, and you are considered the more expendable part of the equation. This isn't a story of glory or heroism. It's a quiet descent into a bureaucratic nightmare where the paperwork is as deadly as the bullet. And a small fact check before we begin. You probably won't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see how far these whispers from the void travel. And so the wheel of fate turns again. Sacrifice has been made. The first key has turned, and mankind takes one step closer to the light of the throne. This is not the end. This is only the beginning. You do not ask to become a handler for the Officio Assassinorum. You are chosen. The selection happens in rooms you never see, based on reports you never read. Someone, somewhere high above you, decides that your loyalty finally outweighs your fear. They measure your capacity for absolute obedience against your tolerance for absolute horror and find the imbalance acceptably in your favor. It's a purely clinical assessment, like calculating the load-bearing capacity of a support beam. Except you're the beam, and the load is the psychological weight of state-sanctioned murder. There is no ceremony. You aren't led into a candlelit chamber for some solemn initiation ritual. There are no oaths spoken in High Gothic. One day, you are simply called into a sterile administrative office. A tech adept, his face a mask of bored indifference, presses a device against your neck. You feel a sharp, burning sensation, like a brand being seared into your flesh just beneath the skin. It is a new seal burned into your identity. With it comes a single new order. Report to the sigilless vault before the fourth bell of second shift. That's it. Congratulations, your life is over. The paperwork is probably less complicated than filing your annual tithe forms. You walk through corridors you have passed 1,000 times before, but everything feels different. The path is the same, yet the journey is alien. Guards you have never seen before, clad in black Karapachi armor with no regimental markings, now stand at checkpoints that didn't exist yesterday. They step aside as you approach, their eyes fixed on a point just beyond your shoulder. They don't look at you. They look at the authority now encoded in your chip, the invisible mantle of dread that has just been draped over you. The door to the vault is a monument to finality. It is black ceramite, 3 meters thick and cold to the touch. The surface is not smooth. It is covered in kill markers, a dense tapestry of scratches and glyphs etched into the material. Lore masters still debate whether the language of these kill markers is a forgotten dialect of High Gothic, or something else entirely, a proto-language of Mer itself, understood instinctively by those with the correct psychological profile. The door slides open with a pneumatic hiss that sounds disturbingly like a final exhalation. It seals behind you with a solid, tomb-like thud of a coffin lid closing, and that is it. That is the last natural sunlight you will ever see without filters. It's the last air you breathe that hasn't been scrubbed through humming recycle units designed to strip pheromones and the lingering scent of fear from the atmosphere. You are now in the heart of the beast. The sigilless vault is less an archive and more cathedral dedicated to murder. Rows of monolithic data stacks rise into an oppressive darkness overhead, their tops lost in shadow. Each one contains the grim ledgers of the dead, mission parameters, psychographic analyses of targets who have been dust for centuries, after-action reports written in blood and sanitized by bureaucracy. Historians still argue whether the practice of using human skin for vellum or parchment began out of pure resource scarcity during the Age of Strife, or as a deliberate act of psychological dominance by the early Imperium to remind its subjects of their place. In the grand machine, standing here, you don't doubt the answer. The air itself is thick with the smell of old metal and old parchment, the kind of paper made from human skin because sourcing it from animals was deemed wasteful. The Imperium's approach to recycling has always been thorough. You stand in the center of that vast, silent space for what might be minutes or hours. Time seems to move differently here, as if the sheer, accumulated weight of all those documented deaths has created its own gravity, pulling everything into a slow, inevitable decay. The silence is eventually broken by the faintest sound of movement. Its servitor emerges from the shadows between the data stacks. Its human face has been completely replaced with a coordinate array of blinking lights and whirring microgyros. It doesn't speak. It can't. It glides towards you and places a data slate in your hands. The slate is warm, as if someone had been holding it just moments before. You look down at the screen. Your new designation is displayed in stark, clinical letters: Handler Operative. Designation Secundus 7749. Below it, a single line of text pulses with a malevolent, blood-red light against the black screen. It is the first and most important lesson you will ever learn. It is the motto, the mantra, and the warning. The Emperor's hand never hesitates. The servitor that gave you the data slate now turns and glides back into the shadows. Its movements perfectly silent. Your instruction is clear. Though no word was spoken, you follow it. You are led away from the cavernous main vault, down a series of narrow, featureless corridors. The air grows warmer, more sterile. The distant hum of the facility's core systems becomes more pronounced. You are being taken to your first lesson. The room is a perfect cube of sensory deprivation. There are no windows, no decorations, no symbols of the Imperium on the walls. It contains only two simple chairs and a table made from some dark, unfamiliar wood that smells faintly of astringent chemicals. It is a space designed to strip away all distractions. To focus your mind entirely on the information about to be delivered, you sit. The servitor departs, the door sealing behind it with a soft click. A man is already sitting across from you. You did not see him enter. You assume he was there the whole time, a fixture of the room itself. This is Proctor Malthus. His face is the most unsettling thing you have ever seen, because it is a canvas of absolute nothing. It has been surgically altered, every muscle capable of expressing emotion severed or removed. The result is a smooth, waxy plane of flesh, like a high-quality skin. Mask that has been permanently fused to the skull beneath. Lore masters still debate where the high-ranking members of the Officio, like the proctors, undergo facial alteration voluntarily as a sign of devotion, or if it is a mandatory procedure to prevent them from unintentionally conveying compromising emotional data. Looking at him, you suspect it's the latter. He would be the galaxy's best poker player if he had any interest in games. His voice, when he speaks, matches his face. It is perfectly modulated, neither warm nor cold, a monotone stream of data. It's the voice of a coordinator, reading a technical manual aloud. He doesn't introduce himself. He doesn't ask your name. He knows who you are. The lesson begins. An assassin is not a person. He says, understand this first, and you may survive your first assignment. Fail to understand it, and you will die screaming, or worse, live to understand it too late. He lets the words hang in the dead air of the room. This is the foundational truth upon which your new life is built. He explains that the beings you will manage are no longer human in any meaningful sense. They are directives wearing skin. They are the Emperor's will made manifest, forged in crucibles of pain and reconditioning that you can barely imagine. Their training breaks every known human limitation, physical, mental, and spiritual. Their reconditioning systematically erases every human weakness, fear, love, doubt, mercy. What remains is a perfect weapon, a biological machine calibrated for a single purpose. Termination. Your function, he continues, is to keep that directive aimed, fed and contained. You are the hand that wins the clockwork, he says, his blank eyes fixed on you. You the switch that activates the weapon. You are the minder of a beast that must be kept starved enough to remain vicious, but not so starved it turns on its keeper. Then comes the part that truly chills you. The cold, hard logic of your position. You are, in all ways that matter, more expendable than the asset you manage. He explains it with the simple clarity of a mathematical proof. An assassin is an investment of staggering proportions, decades of training, priceless bioalchemy, irreplaceable archaeotech, and psychological conditioning so intense it borders on sorcery. To create a single Vindicare or Calidus assassin costs more than raising and equipping an entire regiment of the Imperial Guard. You, on the other hand, are just a cog, a highly specialized and intelligent cog, but a replaceable one. If you are killed, another candidate with a similar psychological profile can be selected, trained, and slotted into your place if the asset is lost. It is a catastrophic failure that can take a century to replace. Historians still argue about the true origin of the Officio's expendability doctrine. Some trace it back to the logistical necessities of the Great Crusade, where experienced astartes were valued far higher than their human support staff. Others suggest it is a more recent development, a psychological tool to ensure handlers never develop a sense of self-importance that could compromise a mission. You don't care about the history. You only care about the reality sitting across the table from you. As if to punctuate the lesson, he slides a data core across the table. It's the size of your thumb, warm to the touch, and its casing is covered in complex seals of encryption you don't recognize. You have been granted clearance to access skill ledgers dating back to M35. He says, mission codices encrypted under 9 layers of auto oversight. Psychological profiles of every assassin type currently in operation, and 12 variants that have been declared extinct. It's a library of horrors, the complete and unabridged history of sanctioned murder for the last whole millennia. It makes you wonder what could possibly make an entire type of Imperial assassin go extinct. The possibilities are not comforting. You learn a strange piece of trivia in that moment. The chemical smell from the table isn't the wood itself, but residue from the cleaning oils used on the proctor's agmetic hands. The blend is a custom mix from the Adeptus Mechanicus, designed to both lubricate and prevent psychic residue from accumulating on his person. Every record begins the same way. Mouthy states, his voice unwavering, objective designated, asset assigned, handler attached. He leans forward slightly. The first hint of movement you've seen from him. Study them. Learn how handlers die. Learn what mistakes cannot be made twice, because there is never a second chance to make them. This is your assignment. Not to learn how to succeed, but to study the anatomy of failure in excruciating detail. Your first task is to immerse yourself in the ghosts of your predecessors, to walk through a graveyard of their mistakes and pray you learn enough not to join them. It's the most terrifying and most practical piece of advice you've ever been given. You leave the proctor's office with a worn data core clutched in your hand. It feels heavier than its size would suggest, weighted down with the sins of millennia. A silent servitor guides you to your new quarters, another journey, through identical corridors that seem designed to induce a sense of placelessness. You are not just in a new job. You are in a new reality, and this reality is a cage of grey metal and recycled air. Your new home is a cell, 3 meters square. There is no attempt to pretend it is anything else. Inside, you find a cot with a thin mattress, a compact cogitator terminal built into the wall, and a waste reclamation unit. That's it. There are no personal items, no decorations, nothing that might suggest a human being lives here rather than a biological component waiting to be activated. It's the ultimate expression of minimalist design. If the designer was a deeply depressed architect with a passion for industrial efficiency, your old life, with its minor comforts and personal trinkets, feels like it belonged to someone else, a character in a story you vaguely remember reading. You sit at the terminal, the metal chair cold against your back. You slot the data core into the input port. A series of authentication challenges flicker across the screen. Intricate sigils of the High Lords of Terror, the Inquisition, and the Officio itself flare and dissolve as the system verifies your new clearance. 9 layers of encryption peel away like an onion, each one revealing a more complex and esoteric lock beneath. Finally, the last seal cracks, and you are granted access. The screen goes black for a moment, then floods with streams of raw data. You read for 6 hours straight. Your eyes burn from the harsh light of the monitor. Your throat is dry, but you don't think. An endless river of death. Each entry is a human life, or hundreds of lives, reduced to a target designation and a confirmation of termination. You see governors of entire sectors, rebellious, generals, charismatic priests whose faith became inconvenient, rogue psychers, heretical tech priests, and entire noble family lines. These are not simple assassinations. They are acts of historical revisionism. They are erased with such surgical precision that history itself is rewritten round their absence, leaving no scars, no questions, only a smooth, seamless narrative approved by the High Lords. Lore masters still debate the full extent of the Officio Assassinorum's influence on Imperial history, while official records attribute major historical shifts to glorious battles or acts of faith. These hidden ledgers suggest that many pivotal moments turned on a single, silent death delivered from the shadows, a truth the wider Imperium can never be allowed to know. Beneath each mission file, you see a handler designation. Some names, you notice, appear dozens of times, ghostly signatures of competence, luck, and an iron will. They are the legends you've never heard of, the true survivors, but many others appear only once. Their designation is followed by a stark red seal stamped across the file. The seal is a final, damning verdict, the crimson accused. For these termination seals isn't standard administratum issue. It's a biochromatic agent that contains a trace genetic marker of the deceased handler, harvested from their last biological screening. It serves as a final, definitive and deeply morbid form of record keeping. The reasons for the seal vary, but they all tell a story of failure, terminated during operation. This is the most common and the most vague. It could mean anything from a stray bullet to being in the wrong place when a building collapsed. It is the closest a handler gets to an honorable death. Consumed by asset during retrieval, this one is far more chilling. The phrasing is deliberate, clinical. It paints a gruesome picture of an assassin turning on its keeper, a rabid dog biting the hand that feeds it, mind scrubbed due to contamination. This is perhaps the most horrifying fate. Your body lives on, but your mind, your memories, your very soul are erased. You become a shell. Your brain wiped clean of whatever truth you accidentally witnessed. Historians still argue whether the concept of psychic contamination is a genuine wart-based phenomenon or a catch-all term used by the Inquisition and Officio to justify the elimination of personnel who have been exposed to inconvenient truths. The number of mind scrubbings in these logs suggests it's very convenient. Catch all as you continue to scroll. A horrifying pattern begins to emerge. You start running statistical analyses, your mind falling back on the cold logic of numbers to shield itself from the dread. You cross-reference mission types, asset classes, and handler fates, The conclusion is inescapable. The most common cause of a handler's death isn't enemy action. It is not a firefight, a Xenos attack, or a chaotic uprising. It is, according to the official records, a failure to maintain proper distance from the asset. The words of Proctor Malthus echo in your mind. The assassins are not people. They are weapons, and these archives are the proof. They are unstable, volatile, and just as likely to destroy you as they are the target. Your job is not to fight the enemy. Your job is to hold a primed, psychologically unstable bomb and pray you have the right deactivation codes when it starts ticking. The red seals are a testament to all the handlers who heard. But ticking too late. For 3 weeks, you do nothing but study. The data core becomes your entire world. You eat nutrient paste at your terminal. You sleep, in brief, nightmare-haunted cycles on your cot. The digital ghosts of dead handlers are your only companions. You learn the 100 subtle ways a Calidus agent's disguise can fail, the specific chemical triggers for an Eversor's rage, and the precise psychic frequency a Culexus must be shielded from to prevent a catastrophic feedback loop. You learn that your predecessors died from arrogance, from compassion, from a moment's hesitation, or from a single misplaced digit in a DNA signature. Then, the assignment comes. It arrives on your terminal at 0300 hours, slicing through the quiet of your cell. There is no preamble, no polite request, just 3 lines of code, efficient text that change everything. Primary handler deceased. Temporary reassignment required. Report to Revolt Sigma 9 for asset briefing. The phrase primary handler deceased sits on the screen, devoid of any detail. There is no explanation of how or why. There is no name. There is only a vacancy, a broken link in the chain of command, and you are the replacement part being slotted into place. You wonder for a moment if his data file is already being stamped with one of those red seals you've come to dread. You dress in the dark, pulling on the uniform you were issued. It's a black body glove under a long coat of reinforced synth leather. The boots are designed to make no sound on metal floors. The entire ensemble is less a uniform and more a functional skin from moving through shadows. During a medical procedure you barely remember, a microbead Vox unit was surgically implanted behind your ear. It's the ultimate corporate hands-free device. Though you suspect the warranty is void if you take it into the warp, the journey to Revolt Sigma 9 takes you deeper into the facility's core than you have ever been. The security checkpoints become increasingly severe. At first, they scanned your identity. Now, they are scanning everything. Your biometrics, your retinal patterns, your genetic markers. One checkpoint even scans the unique electrical signature of your nervous system. Historians still argue whether the Officio's obsession with multi-layered biometric security stems from a legitimate fear of shape-shifting Xenos, or from a deep-seated paranoia about internal infiltration by chaos cults during the Horus Heresy, a fear that has calcified into doctrine over 10 millennia. You just hope your nervous system isn't having an off day. The Armory is not the cluttered workshop you might imagine. It is a sanctuary, a sterile, climate-controlled vault where weapons are displayed like holy relics. The air is cold and smells of consecrated oils and the sharp tang of ozone from nearby stasis fields. In the center of this vault, motionless, stands your first asset. He is a Vindicare assassin. His designation is Serratus Theta. He is tall and so thin that he appears fragile, his skin stretched taut over sharp bones. It is pale as corpse. Wax, a common side effect of the temple's rigorous chemical conditioning and lack of exposure to natural starlight. He wears the bodysuit of his temple, a mosaic of dark red and black that ripples and shifts with the light, designed to break up his silhouette. In his arms, he cradles his rifle as if it were a sleeping child. The weapon is a masterpiece of lethal art. Every component has been handcrafted by a master artificer. The barrel is inscribed with micro-etched prayers in High Gothic, and the scope is enhanced with augmetics that could track a target's heartbeat from 3 kilometers away. He doesn't acknowledge your presence. His eyes are closed. He is utterly still. Vindicare assassins are trained to enter a meditative trance between missions, his state known to some. As the Umbra Mortis, they slow their metabolism to conserve energy, shutting down all unnecessary cognitive functions. His strange piece of trivia is that this state is so profound it can sometimes fool basic life sign detectors. There are records of Vindicares being mistaken for corpses on the battlefield, only to complete their mission hours later. He is as close to a machine as living flesh. Can become without servitor conversion. Lore masters still debate whether a Vindicare assassin in his trance is truly conscious. Some theories suggest their mind retreats to a simulated firing range within their own consciousness, practicing the coming shot thousands of times in a simulated time dilation. Others believe the mind is simply empty, a pure vessel waiting for the signal to act. You stand there, a few meters away, watching this living statue of death. He is your asset, your weapon, your responsibility. The lessons from the data core feel very real now. The man who handled this assassin just a day ago is now dead. You are his replacement, and the silent, patient killer before you gives no indication that he knows or cares that a change in management has occurred. The weight of the title handler settles upon you, colder and heavier than the vault's recycled air. A hololith flickers to life in the center of the armory vault. The distorted, expressionless face of Proctor Matthews appears, his image wavering in the cold air. The briefing is, like everything else in the Officio, brutally efficient. The target is a traitor cardinal operating from a fortified orbital station high above the hive world of Scarvus Primus. He has been selling ecclesiarchy secrets to a Xenos merchant collective, trading sacred relics for weapons that are now in the hands of heretics. The Ordo Hereticus wants him dead, but they want it done quietly. No orbital bombardment, no teams of Tempestus science storming the station. They want a ghost, a single, clean termination. With no evidence to trace, Suratus Theta will take the shot from maximum range. The Proctor's monotone voice echoes in the vault. You will coordinate positioning, monitor station patterns, and ensure extraction protocols remain viable. The mission window is 72 hours. Failure is not acceptable. Exposure is not acceptable. Questions? You have none. Questions are for people who believe they have choices. You depart on a vessel that, for all intents and purposes, does not exist. It is a stealth barge, a sliver of black metal so wrapped in void suppressors and refractor, feels that it registers on even the most sensitive Auspex scanners as a patch of empty space. It is the Imperium's premiere of the book's transportation, and you assume the in-flight mail service will be terrible. The crew are all mutes, their tongues surgically removed to prevent accidental intelligence leaks. Their hands are tattooed with the kill markers of previous operations. They move through the ship like ghosts, their eyes never meeting yours, their silence an oppressive, constant presence. You set up your command post in a cramped room filled with the soft glow of hololith displays and OpSpex feeds. Rays for Vox intercept chatter hiss with static. Your job is to turn this chaotic storm of data into a single, perfect moment of opportunity. The orbital station keeps no fixed schedule. The Cardinal, a man steeped in paranoia, moves between chambers randomly, always surrounded by bodyguards whose movements suggest elite military training. But patterns exist even in chaos. You are trained to find them. For 40 hours, you do nothing but watch. You track guard rotations, power fluctuations in the station's void shields, and the Cardinal's erratic path through his gilded cage. Suratus Theta remains on the firing deck, a silent statue in the ship's belly. He doesn't eat. He doesn't drink. You are not entirely sure he blinks. He just stands at the firing position you designated, a point in the void where your barge's trajectory will intersect with his line of sight for exactly 9 seconds. Lore masters still debate the extent to which Vindicare assassins can function without a handler. While their training allows for incredible autonomy, the sheer volume of data processing required for orbital mechanics, target scheduling, and extraction logistics is beyond the single mind, especially one focused solely on the moment of the kill. The handler is, in essence, the assassin's external brain dot by R40. You have it, his preferred meditation chamber, the precise times when the guards rotate, and the 17-second window when he stands before a massive viewing port to gaze down upon the planet he has betrayed. As the mission clock winds down, you watch Stratus Theta's vitals on your display. He is preparing for the shot by shutting his own body down. His heart rate drops to 20 beats per minute. His oxygen consumption becomes minimal. His body temperature falls to just above hypothermic levels, the specific cocktail of chemicals and mental conditioning that allows a Vindicare to enter this near-hibernation state is called stasis anima. One of its known side effects is a permanent inability to process the taste of salt, which is why Vindicare nutrient rations are notoriously bland. Even by Imperial standards, he is ceasing to be a man and becoming a biological firing platform, a delivery system for the Emperor's justice wrapped in meat and bone. The moment comes at R71. Your OpSpecs feed confirms the Cardinal's position at the viewing port. You transmit the green signal to Stratus Theta's targeting augmetics. He takes the shot before your cogitator has even finished calculating the final gravitational variance. He doesn't need it. His entire being is the ultimate ballistic calculator. The round leaves the barrel with almost no sound. Historians still argue whether the Exodus rifle's ammunition is purely physical or has a minor psychic component. The rounds contain a sliver of an unknown alloy that disrupts energy fields, and some tech priests claim this alloy resonates with the user's intent, making the bullet seek its target on a metaphysical level. You watch through the scope's feed as this piece of tech heresy crosses 3 kilometers of void. It penetrates the station's armor viewing port, the reinforced glass shattering inward in a spray of silent crystals. The round enters the Cardinal's skull just above his left eye. The hydrostatic shock pulps his brain in microseconds. It continues, punching through the back of his skull, through the bulkhead behind him, through 3 more decks of the station before finally embedding itself in a primary support beam where it will never be found. The Cardinal's body doesn't fall immediately. His nervous system, still processing commands issued before death, keeps him upright for another 2 seconds. Then his knees buckle, and he collapses in a heap. Across the station, alarms begin screaming. You watch as guards flood into the meditation chamber, as medic servitors attempt futile resurrection protocols. And through it all, Stratus Theta remains motionless, rifle still aimed, waiting for you to grant him clearance for extraction. The weapon has fired. Now it waits for the hand that wins it to give the next command. The alarms on the orbital station scream, a frantic, electronic wail of confusion and terror. Through the scope feed, you see guards in panicked motion, medic servitors trundling uselessly toward the body of the Cardinal. But on your stealth barge, there is only silence. Stratus Theta has not moved. His rifle is still aimed at the point in space where his target used to be. He would stay there forever if you didn't give the order. That is his training. Complete the mission or die in position. Never retreat without permission. You key the microbead behind your ear. Extraction authorized. Return to holding Bay Alpha. He moves then. The motion is smooth and precise, without a single wasted gesture. He breaks down the rifle into its component parts, stowing them in a sealed, vacuum-proof case. He moves through the ship's corridors like water flowing downhill, silent and inexorable. By the time the orbital station security forces have sealed every exit and begun frantically scanning the void for intruders, your barge is already accelerating toward the system's edge. Wrapped in its stealth fields, an invisible ghost slipping away into the dark. This is the moment you learn a handler's real task starts after the kill. The assassination itself was simple, almost mechanical. A function was performed and completed. But the aftermath requires artistry. The clean, single shot is followed by a messy, sprawling campaign of bureaucratic warfare. The assassination took a few microseconds. The cover-up will take you 6 weeks. It's the most unbalanced work-to-clean-up ratio imaginable. Like being a chef who spends 1 minute cooking an egg and the next 6 weeks scrubbing the entire kitchen with a toothbrush. You spend those weeks not in the field, but chained to a cogitator terminal, your world shrinking to the green glow of encrypted data streams. You become a ghost in the machine of the administratum, pulling levers and cutting wires in a system so vast that no single person truly understands it. You coordinate with anonymous contacts, other agents buried deep within the Imperial bureaucracy, to systematically falsify the Cardinal's death. The official cause becomes a sudden and tragic organ. Failure, aneurysm, heart attack. You get to pick. It's a grim sort of creative writing. Every guard who witnessed the body's condition is a loose end. You comb through service records and psych profiles, and one by one, you have them all transferred. They are sent to distant penal colonies, forgotten frontier outposts, or garrison duty on worlds where the only thing to do is watch. Dust storms roll by. Their memories will be suppressed through subtle chemical means slipped into their rations, or for other more troublesome cases, simply erased through psycho-conditioning. They will have a gaping hole in their memory of that day, a fog they can never quite pierce. Lore masters still debate the efficacy of memory-altering techniques used by the Imperium. While full mind scrubbing is effective, chemical suppression is known to have unpredictable side effects, sometimes leading to recurring nightmares or fragmented memories that can surface years later, creating security risks that require further administrative action. You have to track every single piece of information related to the event. Every off-world transaction the Cardinal made must be rerouted or deleted. Every document that mentions his true cause of death from the initial security alert to the final Medicaid report must be altered or destroyed. The standard data slate, used by Imperial officials, has a hidden secondary memory core, and less specifically purged with a high-level clearance code. It retains a ghost image of all previously stored data. You spend days hunting down these ghost images across the station's network and wiping them from existence. You are systematically murdering reality itself. You work until the truth becomes a rumor. The rumor becomes a lie, and the lie becomes forgotten history. Historians still argue which branch of the Imperium is more powerful, the Astra Militarum with its countless armies, or the Administratum with its ability to misfile a single document and condemn a world. You now know that information, and its absence, is the ultimate weapon. The Administratum has a bland, sterile term for this process, post-incident alignment. It makes the systematic erasure of truth sound like a minor accounting error. The Inquisition calls it cleanup, as if truth were just dirt, to be swept away. You, however, come to call it what it is, state-sanctioned erasure. You learn that you can burn worlds with paperwork just as effectively as you can with bullets. The experience teaches you the true, soul-grinding nature of your rule. You're not just a handler of assassins. You are now a janitor of history, and it is the most thankless and terrifying job in the galaxy. The Officio teaches you efficiency through volume. After the success with Serratus Theta, the assignments come faster. The work becomes rhythm of briefings, executions, and the meticulous erasure of history. You manage 16 more operations in as many months, each one a different flavor of sanctioned death. each one deepening your understanding of the terrible tools at your disposal. You coordinate a callous infiltration of a governor's court that ends with an entire family tree being pruned back to the root, their deaths all appearing as a tragic series of accidents and sudden illnesses. You oversee a Culexus deployment against a Psycho coven that leaves the target's fortress standing, but utterly empty of all life, the walls still echoing with silent screams that will never fade. You handle the logistics for a Venom operation so subtle that the target, a high-ranking fleet admiral, dies of apparent heart failure 3 years after the agent delivered the poisoner. Long-acting toxin that waited in his bloodstream like a patient predator. You manage them all. You handle the logistics. You coordinate the aftermath, and you learn to sleep through the screams that sometimes echo from the reconditioning chambers when an assassin's psyche is damaged beyond acceptable parameters. You become good at your job, and that is when you are most at risk of forgetting the most important lesson. When a handler fails, the Officio does not forgive. There are no second chances. There are no reprimands or demotions. Failure equals termination, either of your career or your life, and the distinction is often purely academic. You see it happen once, not in a data log, but with your own eyes, during a routine asset transfer on the forge world of Draxo's hive. A handler named Corvinus, a man you'd exchanged brief, professional nods within the corridors, had been assigned an Eversor for a high-value elimination. The target was a cult leader who had fortified himself in the Underhive, surrounded by thousands of armed fanatics, a legitimate threat, a clear mission. But Corvinus had made a mistake, a single, tiny, human error, while transcribing the target's genetic data for the Eversor's wetware. He had misfiled a single digit in the DNA signature. It was a typo, a mistake so minor that it slipped through 3 separate levels of coordinator-assisted verification. It was the 41st millennium's deadliest autocorrect failure. Lore masters still debate the true nature of an Eversor's wetware. Some argue it's a simple biocoordinator that locks onto a genetic pattern. Others posit a more esoteric link, a form of blood-borne machine soul that makes the assassin an extension of the data itself. This would explain why a single corrupted digit doesn't just confuse the target lock, but completely rewrites the mission's holy imperative. The error propagated through the Eversor's targeting protocols. When the sarcophagus on the launch bay cracked open and the Eversor was unleashed upon the hive, it followed its corrupted directive with perfect, unwavering efficiency. It didn't head for the Underhive. It tore a path through the upper spire, crashing into the hab block of a loyal noble family, manufacturer owners who produced Laskans for the Imperial Guard. You saw the after-action feeds the Eversor tore through their entire household, the nobles themselves, their extended relatives, their children, their staff, even their Groxhound pets. It annihilated every living thing in a 3-block radius. The slaughter was immaculate in its execution, a masterpiece of violence aimed at entirely the wrong people. The Eversor, having completed its mission, then returned to Corvinus's position for extraction, its black carapace armor dripping with blood that, according to the report, smelled wrong because it was the blood of the innocent. Historians still argue about the Imperium's concept of innocence legally. Any citizen can be declared expendable for the greater good. The tragedy of the nobles on Draxo's hive wasn't their death, but the inefficiency of it. They were a valuable resource, and their accidental destruction was a logistical failure, not a moral one. This cold calculus is the bedrock of Imperial justice. The official incident report was sealed with a single chilling note: handler consumed by asset during retrieval. The official term is Code Praesal Mortis Interna, a classification that is never investigated further. The phrasing was deliberately vague, leaving it unclear whether the Eversor's corrupted wetware had caused it to kill Corvinus by accident, or if the Officio had ordered the assassin to execute its handler as punishment for such. A catastrophic failure. No one ever found out. They didn't replace him. They simply deleted his name from all records, scrubbed his existence from the archives, and reassigned the Eversor to a new handler who was given explicit, multi-layered instructions on proper DNA verification protocols. Corvinus became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered among handlers as a reminder that your career can be ended by a single keystroke. You saw that same Eversor 3 months later in a holding bay, motionless in its sarcophagus, and you swear, through the frosted crowglass, that it has tracked your movement with a cold, predatory focus. The lesson was clear. The asset is not your ally. It is a force of nature you are tasked to direct, and if your aim falters for even a second, that force will turn and erase you. After witnessing the fate of Corvinus, your next assignment is your first Eversor deployment. You request it specifically. This is not because you have a death wish or a newfound desire to work with the most dangerous and unstable assassin type in the Officio's arsenal. You request it because refusing would have suggested fear, and in your line of work, fear is a disqualification. It is the ultimate high-stakes corporate maneuver, volunteering for the project everyone else is terrified of. Just to prove you belong in the room, they keep Eversors in a state that is not quite life and not quite death. Between missions, they float inside armored sarcophagi, suspended in a cocktail of nutrient gel and combat stimulants. This chemical soup is so toxic it would kill an unmodified human in seconds. In that toxic bath, their metabolisms are accelerated beyond all human limits. Their nervous systems are rewired to process pain as pleasure, and their minds are locked in simulations of endless, glorious slaughter. They dream of murder while they wait. The target is a planetary rebellion led on Karth IV, a forged world that has declared its independence from the Adeptus Mechanicus. The rebellion is well-armed and deeply entrenched. The Imperium could have sent regiments of the Guard, deployed legions of Skittery, or simply virus-bombed the planet from orbit. Instead, they send one Eversor and one handler. This is the Officio's way of making a statement. The message is clear. You are not worth a war. You are only worth an execution. Historians still argue whether the Eversor Temple was created primarily as a weapon of war or a tool of terror, while their effectiveness in eliminating command structures is undeniable. The sheer indiscriminate collateral damage they cause suggests their true purpose is to leave a psychological scar on a rebellious populace, a bloody warning that will be passed down for generations. You watch the sarcophagus through armored glass as your transport descends toward the planet. The Eversor inside is designated as at F9. No name, no history, just a designation that tells you nothing about the human it once might have been. Inside the frosted glass, you can see movement, the assassin's body twitching in its chemical dreams. You monitor its biochemistry readings, a heart rate of 240 beats per minute at rest, and levels of adrenaline and combat stimulants that should have caused immediate cardiac failure. But Eversors are built to exceed limits, to keep going through sheer, conditioned hatred long after their flesh should have failed them. The signal comes at 1400 hours, local time. The sigil on your wrist plate flares a brilliant red, hot enough to feel through your uniform. You enter the release codes into your command terminal. Through the remote feeds, you watch as the sarcophagus cracks open like a tomb. Nutrient gel floods. Out in a wave of chemical-laced fluid, the creature inside launches out screaming. Its voice is a sound no human throat should produce, a war cry that is equal parts pure rage and ecstatic rapture. It wears black Karapochi armor that has been fused directly into its flesh. In its hands, it carries a power sword and a Noro gauntlet, weapons bonded so completely to its nervous system that they function as extensions of its will. You sit in your command post, 3 kilometers away, watching the kill feed on your display. It's a detached, sterile view of utter horror. The data streams in. From microbeads embedded in the Eversor's armor, impact vectors update in real time as it crashes through the target building's defenses. Blood oxygen levels of targets drop from nominal to 0. In your periphery monitors, adrenal surges spike as the assassin moves through the structure like a force of nature. The rebellion's guards open fire with heavy stubbers and lascans. But the Eversor moves too fast. A blur of black armor and bloody murder, it dodges through gunfire that should have shredded it, killing with an efficiency that makes the slaughter seem almost beautiful in its terrible perfection. Entire city blocks go dark on your tactical display as power grids fail and fires spread. The Eversor doesn't discriminate. Anyone who raises the weapon dies. Anyone who runs dies. Anyone who stays still dies. It is a living apocalypse, and you are the one holding the leash. The target dies 7 minutes into the assault. The Eversor finds him in a fortified bunker and executes him with its neurogauntlet. This weapon doesn't just kill. It sends a feedback pulse of pure agony through the victim's nervous system, which is then absorbed by the Eversor's suit and converted into a minor chemical stimulant. It literally gets a rush from the pain it inflicts. The Eversor doesn't stop. It continues killing for another 40 minutes, working its way through the target's entire command structure. By the time you transmit the recall signal, the death count has exceeded 3,000. Lore masters still debate if an Eversor assassin retains any fragment of its original personality. But watching this, you see no ghost in the machine. Only the machine-dotted returns, dragging a tattered banner made from the target's command ropes. It kneels before you, its heart rate still thundering above 200, steam rising from its superheated armor. It whispers the target's name again and again, a mantra of completion, proof that the directive has been fulfilled. The medic team has to wait 7 minutes for the assassin's metabolic rate to drop enough that the sedatives won't kill it. When they finally freeze it in cryostasis, you can still hear its heartbeat through the ice. You can still see its eyes moving beneath its frozen eyelids, still dreaming of murder. The Eversor mission teaches you about the brute force of the Officio. Now, you learn about the chillingly elegant mechanism they use to control it. You learn about the handler code. It is a neurological link, a leash made of pure data, burned into the cortex of every assassin during their final conditioning. This code connects them directly to you, their assigned operative. It is the source of your authority and the bedrock of your control. This neural link allows you to direct their actions through encrypted Vox channels that are less spoken commands and more bursts of pure intent. It provides you with a constant stream of real-time biometric data, letting you know your asset's heart rate, chemical levels, and operational status at all times. Most importantly, it gives you the ability to terminate them. There's a final, absolute command encoded into the link, a kill switch that can end your asset's life instantly if they are compromised or go rogue. It's the ultimate admin privilege, the final, terrifying backspace key for a life. The algorithms that generate these unique handler asset codes are so complex that lore masters still debate their true origin. Some claim it is architect from the dark age of technology, while others whisper its foundational logic was a dangerous gift from a non-human intelligence. But what happens when the handler dies? What happens when the hand holding the leash is suddenly severed? The assassin's code locks automatically. Without the constant handshake signal from their handler, they become trapped in a cognitive loop, forced to repeat their last received order over and over until a replacement can be assigned and a new code burned into their mind. This process is not a simple software update. It takes weeks of delicate work by tech priests, who must hold the assassin's mind in complete stasis while they surgically rewire their neural conditioning. You have seen the logs of what happens when this transition fails. there was a Culexus, assassin, the soulless, psychic blanks that are anathema to the warp. Its handler's mind had been burned out during a psychic assault on its ancient cult. The handler died instantly, and the neurological leash snapped. The Culexus, now untethered, continued to execute its last received orders: patrol Sector 7, eliminate hostile psychers, but without a handler's oversight too. Distinguish friend from foe. It could no longer tell the difference between a chaotic sorcerer and a loyal, sanctioned member of the facility's staff. It became a walking void of death. Guided by a broken command, it wandered for weeks through the facility's 7th sector. You read the reports, a trail of quiet terror. It killed 3 sanctioned astropaths who were part of the facility's communication choir. It murdered Ministorum priests who tried to calm it with prayers, their faith providing no defense against its soul-crushing aura. It left a wake of existential dread, as everyone who came near it experienced the profound, sanity-breaking emptiness that Culexus assassins radiate. Historians still argue if a Culexus assassin is truly a prior in the genetic sense, or a more engineered creation. The animus speculum on their helmet is known to amplify their natural antipsychic aura, but records from their creation are among the most classified texts in the Imperium, suggesting the truth is far more complex. The rampage wasn't loud or explosive like an Eversor's. It was a silent, creeping plague of soul death. The Officio's final response was not to try and capture their priceless asset. The risk of exposure had become too great. During its patrols, witnesses had seen the assassin's face beneath its skull-like helmet. They had learned details about Culexus operations that were supposed to remain buried beneath mountains of classification seals. The purge was ordered, not because of the deaths, but because of the security breach. The Officio sealed the entire sector and flooded it with a corrosive atmosphere designated atmosphere redactus type gamma. This acid mist has the peculiar side effect of turning ceramite a shade of iridescent purple, a telltale sign of a major cleanup that facility residents learn not to ask questions about. You saw the final report. 1,600 personnel terminated, entire data stacks wiped. The block itself was rendered into a toxic, uninhabitable tomb, all because one handler had failed to maintain proper psychic shielding during an operation. This is the new weight you carry. Your death is not just your own. It is a potential catastrophe, a trigger that could unleash an unstoppable monster upon your own allies. It adds a whole new layer of stress to an already stressful job. No pressure. You learn quickly that no one joins the Officio Assassinorum for glory. There are no medals here. There are no promotions announced with fanfare. No grand ceremonies where your achievements are proclaimed before the cheering masses. You exist in shadows beneath shadows. Your name is deleted from public records. Your face is surgically altered to prevent recognition. And your life is compressed into the silent, anxious space between assignments. It's the galaxy's most extreme witness protection program. Except you're not hiding from the criminals. You're hiding from the consequences of your own work. You do it because someone in a high-back chair decided you were more useful than disposable. They analyzed your psychological profile and found the particular combination of traits the Officio values: high intelligence, absolute obedience, emotional detachment bordering on sociopathy, and just enough survival instinct to avoid stupid risks, while taking calculated ones. The only reason you have lasted longer than most is because you learned, very early on, to never ask why a target was marked for death. You learned that lesson hard way by watching another handler die. His name was Justinian. He had managed Calidus operations for 7 years. At tenure so long it was considered almost legendary. In the brutal calculus of handler lifespans, 7 years made him a grizzled veteran, a testament to exceptional competence and an almost supernatural amount of luck. You were a junior handler at the time, observing a High-profile mission briefing run by a visiting inquisitor. The target was an administratum official, ostensibly flagged for corruption, but the documentation trail was unusually thin. The evidence more circumstantial than was typical for an officio-sanctioned kill. Justinian, a man whose success was built on meticulous planning and attention to detail, made a fatal mistake. He raised his hand. He asked for clarification. He requested access to the full evidence files. He wanted to understand why this particular bureaucrat among millions of other corrupt bureaucrats deserved the personal attention of an Imperial assassin. He wanted to understand why the Inquisitor, a severe-looking woman with a servo skull hovering over her shoulder, listened patiently. She nodded as Justinian laid out his logical, reasonable concerns. When he was finished, she thanked him for his input. Then she turned to the two inquisitorial stormtroopers standing by the door and ordered Justinian's immediate termination for demonstrating insufficient operational focus. Lore masters still debate the psychological relationship between the Inquisition and the Officio Assassinorum. While they are sister organizations, the Inquisition often treats the Officio as a tool, a scalpel to be wielded without question. Some believe this creates a deep, unspoken resentment, while others maintain the Officio's doctrine of absolute obedience is so ingrained that they see this dynamic as the natural and correct order of things. Telos bolts, fired with perfect precision, struck Justinian before he could even rise from his chair. His body was removed by a pair of servitors. His replacement, a pale-faced woman who had been standing at the back of the room, was escorted to his now empty seat. The briefing continued within the hour, the mission proceeding without any further interruption. The message was as subtle as a chainsword to the face. The Inquisition loves questions, but not from those they consider their instruments. You finally understood. Questions suggest doubt. Doubt creates hesitation, and hesitation, in this line of work, means death. It creates dead time. Those precious seconds where a mission window might close, a target might escape, or an asset might be compromised. Dead time breeds exposure, and exposure gets everyone involved erased. Not just the handler, but the asset, the support staff, anyone who might have witnessed the failure. A quirky piece of trivia: the standard issue bolt pistols carried by inquisitorial stormtroopers are often loaded with psychoreactive ammunition. The shells are rumored to contain a sliver of crystal that has been exposed to the Inquisitor's own psychic signature, allowing them to detonate the rounds with a thought, an effective tool for enforcing discipline. That day, you learned to stop seeing targets as people. They became abstract data points. You learned to read mission briefings the way a servitor processes code, accepting the input without ever questioning the source. Historians still argue if the Imperium's constant, grinding state of war is a necessary response to a hostile galaxy, or a self-perpetuating cycle fueled by paranoia and institutions that thrive on perpetual crisis. The death of a man like Justinian suggests the system is designed to eliminate not just external threats, but internal questioning as well. You finally understand the true, chilling meaning of the Officio's motto, whispered in every briefing room, and burned into your identiship. The Emperor's hand never hesitates. It is not meant to be inspiring. It is a command and a threat. Hesitation is a human trait, and humanity is the first thing they take from you when you walk through that vault door. After the execution of Justinian, you become the perfect instrument. The lesson is fully internalized. You manage 11 more operations before your second year as a handler is complete. Each success expands your clearance, deepens your access to the Officio's secrets, and binds you tighter to an organization that you are beginning to understand can never be left. Not alive, not with your memories intact. You learn that handlers don't retire in the traditional sense. There is no pension plan, no quiet discharge to a peaceful agri-world. Retirement comes in one of three forms: a full psycho-conditioning that reduces you to a drooling invalid, a convenient training accident that leaves no body to bury, or a simple, unexplained disappearance that everyone understands means the same thing. It is the ultimate till-death-to-us-part employment contract, and the company holds all the power in the divorce proceedings. You were still young enough to believe your competence would protect you, that your perfect record of obedience would be rewarded with something more than a delayed execution. You were wrong about all of it. The transfer comes without explanation, as all significant changes do. One morning, your terminal simply displays a new set of assignment parameters. By the afternoon, you are boarding a transport to a facility you have never heard mentioned in any briefing or data log. The order is brief and contains a single, unnerving detail. The Inquisition has requested a handler with proven restraint. You know this is a euphemism, the kind of sterile, corporate language the High Lords use to describe things too unpleasant for plain High Gothic. Proven restraint could mean anything from doesn't panic under fire to doesn't scream when exposed to mind-breaking horror. The journey takes 3 weeks for the entire transit. You receive no additional information, no briefings, no context, just the destination coordinates and that phrase, proven restraint, echoing in your mind like a warning you can't decipher. The destination is a black site, a space station designated only by its coordinates, orbiting a dead world whose name has been meticulously excised from all Imperial records. Upon docking, your first impression is that the station smells wrong. The air from the umbilical tastes metallic and utterly flat. It has been scrubbed through filters designed to remove not just toxins and pathogens, but psychic residue, emotional resonance, anything that might carry an imprint or a memory. Lore masters still debate the existence and nature of psychic residue, while the ecclesiarchy insists strong emotions can leave a tangible imprint on a location. The Adeptus Mechanicus dismisses such claims as unquantifiable superstition. The fact that an inquisitorial black site has filters specifically designed to remove it suggests that, for the Inquisition at least, the debate is settled. The architecture of the station is deeply unsettling. The corridors are too wide, the ceilings too high, as if they were built to accommodate something much larger than a human, or perhaps to keep something at a great distance from the human staff. You see no personnel during your escort to the briefing chamber, only servitors. But these are unlike any you have seen before. Their faces have been replaced with smooth, blind metal plates, and their optical sensors are covered with dark, non-reflective glass. They move in absolute silence, their augmented feet making no sound on the deck plates. This specific type of servitor is a lectinal, a variant created for inquisitorial facilities. Their vocalizers are removed, and their cogitators are loaded with memetic kill agents that will trigger if they witness unauthorized information, effectively frying their own brain to preserve secrecy. You are escorted into the briefing chamber. It contains a single chair facing a one-way mirror of armored glass that takes up an entire wall. It's an interrogation room. You sit, unsure which side of the interrogation you are on. The door seals, and you are left in silence, alone with your reflection in the dark glass. You wait for 17 minutes. The silence is absolute, heavy, and oppressive. You feel the weight of unseen eyes watching you from beyond the mirror. The weight is a deliberate psychological tool, designed to unnerve you, to measure your composure under pressure. Historians still argue about the exact number of inquisitorial black sites scattered across the Imperium. Estimates range from a few hundred to many thousands. These facilities operate outside all Imperial law, accountable only to the Inquisitor who commands them. You are in one of those places now, a pocket of absolute authority, and you are about to find out what it wants with you. Finally, a voice speaks from hidden vox speakers. It is distorted through enough encryption layers that it sounds sexless, toneless, and barely human. Your new assignment is QLexus Operative. Designation Adept Null 27. The distorted voice from the hidden Vox speakers continues, its words falling like chips of ice into the silence of the briefing room. Standard handler protocols do not apply. It says direct verbal communication is impossible. Physical proximity induces psychosomatic trauma in baseline humans. Your conditioning has been reviewed and deemed sufficient for limited exposure. Then, the mirror in front of you ceases to be a mirror. It shifts from reflective black to perfect transparency in an instant. Beyond the armored glass stands the reason for all this. Secrecy. It is wearing the armor of a QLexus assassin. But calling the thing a person requires a generosity you do not possess. The armor is a suit of synthetic muscle and black ceramite, completely featureless except for the iconic soulless death helmet smooth. Menacing oval of dark metal fitted with targeting agmetics and psychic EMP and BRS. Inside that shell is a prior, an untouchable, a human born with the rare and terrifying genetic mutation that makes them anathema to the warp itself. Their presence doesn't just block psychic power, it negates it. It creates a hole in the very fabric of reality, a void where psychers feel their souls being pulled toward an infinite, silent nothingness. It is a walking, breathing black hole for the spirit. You feel it immediately, a wave of profound wrongness that washes over you despite the meters of armored glass. It is a coldness that has nothing to do with temperature. It's a sensation like falling into an infinite, dark ocean while remaining perfectly still. Your hands begin to tremble, a fine, uncontrollable tremor. A bead of sweat traces a cold path down your forehead. Even as you shiver, it's a primal, biological rejection. Your soul has suddenly realized it is deathly allergic to the person in the next room. The distorted voice continues its briefing. But you can barely process the words over the screaming wrongness radiating from that armored figure. Primary handler deceased during psychic feedback event. Temporary protocols initiated. You will manage Null 27 for the duration of the current mission objective only. Survival probability calculated at 41%. A medical team is standing by for your psychological decontamination post-operation. That is not a reassuring piece of information. The figure behind the glass moves then. A slow, deliberate turn of its head toward you. You cannot see its eyes through the helm's dark lenses, but you feel its attention like a physical pressure against your skull. Like cold fingers pressing into the soft tissue of your brain. Looking for a weakness, your body tries to flee. Every instinct you possess screams at you to run, to get distance from that thing, to escape the terrible, soul-crushing absence it represents. But you remain seated through sheer, hard-won will, your hands gripping the chair's armrests so hard your knuckles turn white. Lore masters still debate the true nature of the prior gene. Some ancient texts refer to it as the gene of the soulless, suggesting those who carry it are born without a spiritual reflection in the warp. More radical tech priests theorize that they are not a void, but a localized anchor of real space, and that their presence violently asserts the laws of physics upon the chaotic energies of the Imperium, causing it to simply cease to exist in their vicinity. To demonstrate what you will be dealing with, they bring in a psyker to brief you on the mission's operational parameters. She is a sanctioned navigator, her third eye covered with a sealed bandage. She stands in your room, facing the now opaque mirror, and begins to speak. She cannot complete 3 sentences. Blood vessels burst in her nose, scarlet streaming down her face. She doubles over and vomits onto the briefing table, a wretched mixture of bile and blood. Her hands shake so violently she drops her data slate. A Medicaid team removes her within minutes. They bring in a second psyker, then a third. They all fail similarly. The proximity to Null 27, even with the armored glass and dampeners between them, makes their bodies betray them. Their psychic gifts turn inward, attacking their own flesh. In the presence of something that fundamentally should not exist, the specific psychosomatic illness induced by proximity to a prior is known in inquisitorial medical texts as prior sickness or animophage anoxia. There is no known cure except increasing one's distance. Historians still argue about the Imperium's treatment of its sanctioned psychers, but watching them be used as living litmus tests for the Culex's power. It's clear they are seen as utterly expendable. This is your warning. The phrase "prove unrestrained now" has a very clear, very terrifying context. You now have to handle a weapon that kills not with a bullet or a blade, but with the pure, silent horror of its own existence, with direct communication being impossible. You are taught a new language. It is a crude but effective system of hand gesture protocols transmitted via your microbead as coded neural echo pulses that the Culexus can interpret without conscious thought. A closed fist means hold position, an open palm means engage targets. A point to the left means move left. You spend days in a training hall, practicing the gestures while Null 27 stands 30 meters away, the designated minimum safe distance for extended exposure. It is the galaxy's most high-stakes and least entertaining game of charades. Even at that range, you feel the soul-deep cold, the constant, draining sensation that the universe is slowly running out of meaning. The mission parameters finally arrive. A cult of telepaths has fortified themselves inside an orbital fortress. They call themselves the Harmonic Convergence, and they preach a gospel of unity through forced psychic integration, absorbing the minds of their followers into a collective consciousness they claim is humanity's next great evolution. The Ordo Hereticus tried sending conventional assault teams, but the telepaths simply mind-control the attackers and turn them against each other. So, they have decided to send you and your talking black hole for souls. Historians still argue about the classification of psychic collectives like the Harmonic Convergence. The Ecclesiarchy often declares them a form of warp heresy, while the Ordo Hereticus may classify them as a nascent chaos cult. More pragmatic Imperial strategists simply view them as an unauthorized consolidation of power that threatens tides and stability, and therefore must be eliminated regardless of their spiritual alignment. Your approach is surgical. You drift in on a stealth cutter until you match the fortress's orbital velocity. You remain aboard the cutter, your command post now a remote one, while Null 27 is loaded into a gravpod, coffin-sized insertion vehicle designed for a single silent drop. You watch through the pod's external feeds as the fortress grows larger, its hull covered in beautiful, swirling murals depicting merged minds and transcendent consciousness. Beautiful lies painted over fortified walls. The pod launches in total silence, its gravitic dampeners masking its approach. It strikes the fortress's outer hull with barely a tremor. Shaped charges burn through the plasteel in seconds. Null 27 steps through the breach into a corridor filled with psychic wards and defensive glyphs meant to repel demons. The psychic backlash from their sudden and total negation kills the entire outer guard detail before you even confirm a successful impact. The mission begins with the enemy scoring a spectacular own goal. You watch the rest of the mission through Null 27's helmet feed. The view is unnervingly stable, the assassin moving with an unnerving calm. As it advances, cultists in its path simply collapse. Their minds implode. From proximity to the absolute psychic null, they haven't just died. Their very consciousness has been erased, leaving bodies that breathe and twitch but contain nothing that could be called human anymore. The corridors of the fortress are decorated with living murals, ranks of telepaths held in meditative trances, their minds permanently joined in psychic communion, their bodies sustained by nutrient feeds while their consciousness existed in a shared dream. As Null 27 passes, the murals die, The psychic connections between them are severed like cut wires. Bodies convulse and go still. Their minds unable to exist outside the collective they had merged with. Hundreds die without a shot fired, ceasing to be because the very thing that defined them had been negated. The most powerful cult members conjure defensive warp fire, but the flames die at null 27's feet, and making themselves in the presence of the anti-warp. Lore masters still debate the state of a soul after it is unmade. By Culexus, unlike a normal death where the soul returns to the Emperor or is consumed by the warp, proximity to a prior seems to erase it from existence entirely. It is a true and final death, a concept so terrifying that even the most stoic Imperial theologians refuse to discuss it. The cult leader waits in the fortress's hut, a chamber built from psychically resonant crystal. He raises his hands and begins to summon a warp entity for protection. Reality tears like wet cloth. You see limbs that bend into many directions, eyes that exist in dimensions your brain cannot process. Then null 27 enters the chamber. The entity doesn't scream. It screams in reverse, the sound pulling backward into silence. Its manifestation collapses. The warp tear seals with an audible crack. The demon is gone, not banished, but unmade. The cult leader, his last defense erased from existence, tries to run. His body makes it 3 steps before his brain simply stops processing. Commands, overwhelmed by the psychic void consuming everything round him. His mind eats itself. When the recovery team boards the fortress hours later, they wear full psychic isolation suits, known as Aegis-grade spirit guards, woven with null stone filaments. Still, 3 of them develop nosebleeds and tremors within minutes. The Psyker T.M. assigned to decontaminate null 27 fares much worse. They all commit suicide within an hour of contact. The first hangs himself with his own prayer beads. The second opens her wrists with a scalpel. The third simply stops breathing, her mind unable to survive the absolute psychic isolation. The Officio logs the mission as immaculate. It's their word for when something impossible happens, and no one wants to document the horrifying mechanism that made it possible. 2 months pass in a blur of routine assignments. You handle a Officio assassination, 3 Vindicare eliminations, and a series of cleanup operations that keep you busy enough not to think about null 27, who you assume is still waiting in its silent, soul-draining isolation chamber somewhere deep in that black site. Your success with the Culexus has earned you a new level of trust within the Officio. Your clearance level is increased, granting you access to oversight systems and deep-level archives that most handlers never see. You've been promoted from the guy who manages the scary employees to the guy who gets to read their HR files. It is this new access that begins to unravel everything. With a broader view of the system, you start noticing things, small at first, easy to dismiss as administrative errors or security protocol updates. But the errors keep appearing, and they are not small. They are impossible. You see a target designation for a renegade naval captain appear twice in 2 different mission briefings, assigned to 2 different handlers in 2 different sectors at the same time. You see a kill confirmation come through for a Venom asset you know for a fact was terminated 3 years earlier during a botched infiltration. You find mission logs referencing successful operations on worlds that were destroyed during the Horus Heresy, 10,000 years ago. These are not simple clerical typos. These are paradoxes, glitches in the very fabric of Imperial record-keeping. Lore masters still debate the nature of Imperial data integrity. Some believe the noosphere is a fragile, fallible system prone to corruption and temporal echoes, especially in close proximity to the warp. Others maintain the system is perfect, and that any apparent paradoxes are not errors, but deliberate falsifications, a form of high-level gaslighting to test the loyalty and perception of those with access. Your training, your entire psychological profile, is based on logic, pattern recognition, and adherence to doctrine. The doctrine demands that you report irregularities, so you do your duty. You spend a week compiling a detailed, encrypted report, flagging the anomalies, cross-referencing the impossible data points, and noting the strange, non-random logic they seem to follow. It feels like someone is deliberately creating loops in the system, testing its redundancies, or perhaps building a shadow system within the existing one. You submit it through the proper channels to your senior proctor and wait for acknowledgement. The acknowledgement comes the next day, but not in the way you expect. You wait to find your quantitator. Terminal locked. Every function is disabled except one. The screen displays a single phrase in High Gothic, pulsing with a soft, hypnotic light. You are now the witness. No explanation, no context. Just that phrase, repeating every time you try to access the terminal, burning itself into your vision until you can see it with your eyes closed. High-level Officio terminals are equipped with a cognitive lockdown function. When triggered, it can isolate the terminal and force it to display a mimetic phrase, designed for a psychological impact. It's the 41st millennium's version of your computer freezing on a cryptic, existential threat. Confused and alarmed, you go to report the issue to your assigned proctor, the man you've been filing reports with for months. His office is empty. His personal effects are gone. His desk is completely cleared of everything except a single, thin data slate. You pick it up. It displays his official termination order. The date of his termination is from 3 months ago. Your blood runs cold. You had spoken with him 2 days ago. You received mission parameters from him last week. You confirmed kills under his direct authorization. The man was a ghost, a walking, talking record of a dead man, and you had been reporting to him for months without knowing. Historians still argue about the prevalence of chronological warfare and information hazards within the Imperium's clandestine branches. The ability to manipulate records to create the illusion of a paradox is a well-documented psychological operation technique. After that, the entire facility feels different. Corridors you walk daily now seem subtly altered. Doorways appear where you don't remember them existing. You see handlers you recognize walk past, without acknowledging you, their faces as blank as servitors. The changes are subtle enough to make you doubt your sanity, but persistent enough to confirm your growing fear. You reported an error in the system, and in response, the system is now rewriting reality around you. The title witness is not an honor. It is a curse. You are seeing the machine break down, and you are trapped inside it. 3 weeks after you were designated the witness, they reassign you. The silence is broken. You understand this is not a return to normalcy. It is a new move in a game whose rules you're only just beginning to comprehend. Your new asset is Calidus Operative Silith, a specialist in polymorphine infiltration and impersonation. The shapeshifters of the Calidus Temple are different from other assassins. They talk. They laugh. They mimic life with a terrifying, convincing perfection. Their training focuses on becoming other people so completely that they can fool even gene scanners, assuming identities down to the most subtle mannerisms and memories that are not their own. They are actors who never leave the stage, killers who make murder look like natural causes or unfortunate accidents. Silith's first act upon meeting you is to shift. Her bones crack and reform under her skin, her facial structure melting and resolving into a perfect copy of your own. She stands before you, wearing your face, and smiles with your own smile. "Now I know who to betray," she says in your voice. It is meant as a dark joke, the kind of gallows humor common among the operatives. But your eyes hold no humor, only a cold, precise assessment. She is testing you, reading your micro-expressions, cataloging the tells that would allow her to become you if the mission required it. The experience is profoundly unsettling. The mission is, by Officio standards, straightforward. A high-ranking tech priest, Archmagos Vethan, has been conducting unauthorized research on. The Fort World of Metallica 7, the Mechanicus officially claims he is exploring servitor optimization. Your intelligence suggests something far more heretical, forbidden human cloning. Silith infiltrates the forge as a young tech adept, her body restructured by polymorphine. For weeks, you manage her encrypted transmissions as she works her way deeper into Vethan's inner circle. Her reports show methodical progress. She dismantles his support structure one member at a time through a series of calculated accidents, convenient transfers, and crises of faith leading to voluntary servitorization. She is a ghost, perfectly adapting to whatever role is needed to move closer to the target. Then, she stops transmitting. The silence lasts for 18 hours. You activate standard recall protocols. No response. Emergency extraction beacons. No acknowledgement. The asset is either dead, captured, or has gone dark deliberately. 3 days after last transmission, a hooded Grey arrives at your quarters, not a servitor, but a human, who places a small package on your desk and leaves without a word. The package is wrapped in skin-sealant cloth, a bioreactive material used to preserve biological samples. Inside, you find a data core, still warm, inscribed with Silith's handler code. You load the core into an isolated terminal, one not connected to the facility's networks. The footage is from her suit's internal recorder, recorded during her last confirmed mission window. It shows Silith moving through the forge's lower levels, areas not marked on any schematic you were provided. She finally reaches a massive, sealed door marked with Mechanicus sigils you do not recognize. She opens it. The chamber beyond is vast, lit by the cold, blue glow of hundreds of stasis tanks, ranged in precise, silent rows. The camera focuses on the nearest tank. Inside, suspended in preservation fluid, is a perfect copy of Silith, down to the polymorphine nodules implanted in her skeleton. The next tank holds another, and another. Hundreds of identical bodies. Historians still argue about the moral status of cloning in the Imperium. While creating servitors or vet-grown soldiers is accepted, replicating an individual soul is high heresy. The Adeptus Mechanicus, however, has long been suspected of maintaining secret genetic tithes, arguing that replicating a valuable asset is a matter of pure logic. Silith's hands tremble as the camera catches the data screens mounted beside each tank. They list handler codes, assignment parameters, deployment schedules. Your designation appears on multiple screens. Handler operative. Designation Secundus 7749. You are assigned to assets that do not yet exist. You are scheduled for missions that have not yet been authorized, to perform kills on targets who may not have even been born yet. The Officio isn't just assassinating its enemies. It's building replacements for its assets and for its handlers. You are not a unique operative. You are a template, a successful model to be reproduced. The recording ends with Silith's voice, a final, horrified whisper through her Vox unit. They're building replacements, and so the story ends, not with a bang, but with a quiet, soul-crushing revelation that echoes in the silence of your small, sterile room. The horrors you were trained to manage, the monsters you were taught to aim at the enemies of the Imperium, were merely a distraction from the true nature of the machine you serve. It is a system that sees no difference between a bullet and a soldier, between an asset and a handler, between a living, breathing person and the copies grown in vats to take their place when they are no longer useful. You are left with this terrible knowledge, a witness to a truth so profound and so heretical that it threatens to unmake your entire understanding of the Imperium itself. The question is no longer about survival, or about completing the next mission. The only question that remains is what a single, expendable man does when he realizes he is not a hand that wins the clockwork, but just another cog. Designed from the very beginning to be easily and seamlessly replaced, the path forward is shrouded in shadows deeper than any you have walked before. And for the first time, you are truly, completely alone. There is no one to trust, no doctrine to follow, only the cold, hard certainty that the system is not just broken, but has been designed this way from the start. Let that thought settle now, as you find your own rest. Let the grim darkness fade, just for a while. The story is over, but the night is long, and sleep is a small mercy we can all still be afforded.